You think mud season is over, right? Well, not in the high peaks, it's not. In fact, there is still a lot of snow, much of it rotten up there in the mountains. And that means hikers are going up there unprepared and over their heads. And that means scary, exhausting rescues for forest rangers. How you can not be one of those rescued hikers this Memorial Day weekend on today's Story of the Day.
Support for Story of the Day is provided by Renew Architecture and Design, designing camps, custom homes, and more throughout NCPR's listening region. Details at renewarchitecture.com.
Hey, I'm David Sommerstein. It's Tuesday, May 23rd. First up, Governor Kathy Hochul and New York City Mayor Eric Adams are facing an influx of up to 80,000 migrants. In response, the two are asking President Joe Biden to waive a rule that says migrants have to wait 6 months before they can apply for and get a job. Karen DeWitt reports from Albany.
Hochul says the migrants are following the legal process of seeking asylum and they are eager to work. She says farms across upstate New York are facing a shortage of 5,000 workers as the growing season gets underway, and the restaurant industry has cut hours in service due to a severe shortage of waiters, dishwashers, and food prep assistants. The governor is asking the president, a Democratic ally, to sign an executive order. It would waive the 100-day waiting requirement before the asylum seekers are allowed to work.
This is an ask. We're asking again. We're pleading, saying this is a great opportunity here in the state of New York to solve two problems: how to help these people get on their feet and support their families.
Hochul was joined by top business and union leaders who say they are ready to provide training programs and help the migrants with gaining full citizenship, as well as Mayor Adams. Adams calls the influx a crisis of epic proportions that could be eased if the waiting period is eliminated.
Let them work. That is our clear message that we're sending. We must expedite work authorization for asylum seekers, not in the future, but now.
There's already been a conflict between Mayor Adams, a Democrat, and Republican leaders of some upstate counties who objected to the city busing some of the migrants to hotels that were willing to accept payments for them. Some counties have declared states of emergency, barring the migrants altogether. Other county leaders have complained that the city of New York has not told them when and where the migrants are coming. Senate Republican Minority Leader Robert Ortt is asking for greater transparency from the New York City and state governments about how they plan to address the crisis.
It is a crisis of and a failure of democratic policies, again, of open borders and sanctuary cities. And there's really no plan about how we're going to deal with it today and how we're going to deal with it in the future.
Hochul took a swipe at the county leaders who have barred the migrants, saying they are adopting bigoted policies based on fear and intimidation. The governor says her own grandfather, who immigrated from Ireland as a teenager fleeing poverty, was a farm worker, and her grandmother, also an Irish immigrant, was a domestic servant. They, like the migrants of the present day, faced prejudices, including signs in businesses saying that Irish need not apply. She says opponents need to take a longer view of what immigrants can bring to the nation's economy.
Their children, 8 children packed into a tiny house, became business leaders, school superintendents, educators, and a granddaughter even became a governor.
5,800 new migrants entered New York City in the past week, and that number could reach 20,000 in the next month. Hochul says a number of temporary housing options are being explored, including erecting tents in parking lots and using dorms at public colleges and universities. The housing is available now that the spring semester has ended, but Hochul says if the 180-day waiting requirement can't be waived, then there will be a conflict in August when students return to campuses. The governor says she's been in close communication with the Biden administration. She says so far, at least, they have not said no to her request. In Albany, I'm Karen DeWitt.
3 people had to be rescued in the Adirondack High Peaks last weekend. They were on an overnight camping trip when they realized they were unprepared for the deep, rotten snow, wet rain, and cold temperatures. The rescue lasted 16 hours from Saturday night to midday Sunday. Forest Ranger Robbie Meekus was one of the first people to reach the group. The hikers were all suffering from hypothermia. She spoke with our Adirondack reporter Emily Russell about the rescue and what hikers should prepare for going into the Memorial Day weekend.
The conditions on the trail are 3 to 4 feet of rotten snow and very, very wet. And, the initial rescue party has to carry, in our case, we're carrying equipment to rescue 3 people. So that's a heavy pack. It's not a day pack. And we had to go 6 miles in and above 4,000 feet in the rain without knowing exactly what we were going to find. So there's a fair amount of anticipation and stress that goes along with that. And then once, of course, you do make contact with those people, there's the added stress of knowing that you now have the lives of 3 people that you're responsible for, and you're not anywhere close to safety. There's no helicopter that can come and get you, and the next available resources are hours and hours away.
This time of year, what do you think is like the biggest mistake that hikers make when they head into the mountains?
So the first thing that I think kind of went wrong with their trip was they recognized sort of fairly early on that there was more snow than they were expecting, and they weren't prepared for it, but they decided to keep going. And that was sort of their first mistake. They really should have turned around the day before. And then, of course, that mistake was compounded by being stuck in a storm that they did not know was coming. But in fact, that storm had been forecasted for most of that preceding week. So that leave no trace principle of tread lightly, be prepared, is a big one. Be prepared means not just the equipment that you're bringing, but also knowing what the weather forecast is going to be, and making sure you're prepared for that weather and not the weather that you have at the trailhead when you start out.
So I drove past the Cascade Trailhead last weekend, and there were just so many cars along Route 73 around there. And, that's before Memorial Day weekend. Do you have any sense what it's going to be like this coming weekend?
So I just looked at the weather forecast. Calls for mostly sunny and low to mid 70s. So when I try to foresee what will happen on any given weekend, that's what I look at. When the forecast is good and it's a weekend, we can expect it to be busy. And on top of that, a holiday weekend, and we can expect it to be really busy. Unfortunately, we've had a fairly cool summer, and we had a late season big snowpack. And those two features are combining together to mean that there's a lot of snow left on the higher summits, particularly on the shaded and north-facing trails. And if you're just going out for a day trip and you're prepared, it's probably okay. But multi-day trips up in that area are just very challenging. That snow is very difficult to travel through, and it just gets you very wet, regardless of how well prepared you are, because it's just wet, rotten snow.
What advice would you give folks who are wanting to get up into the high peaks this weekend?
Well, the DEC still has our mud season travel advisory, so we are advising people not to go above 2,500 feet. The conditions up there are very, very wet, and that's when, hiking up in high elevation with those thin soils, when they're extremely waterlogged and wet, means that you cause an undue amount of erosion. So if you want to hike this weekend, staying in lower elevations, going to visit other areas in the Adirondacks that don't get above 2,500 or 3,000 feet in elevation, and we have many beautiful parts of the Adirondacks, I would advise doing that instead of going to the high peaks.
That was Adirondack Forest Ranger Robbie Meekus speaking with our reporter Emily Russell. We have more news all the time on our website, ncpr.org. Music today by Eddie Lawrence of Moira and Caitlin Scholl of Lake Placid. I'm David Summerstein, North Country Public Radio.